evening and welcome to the Comics Experience Graphic Novel Month Club Masterpiece Edition. One of my favorite ones because we get to talk about the whole range of history of comics and not just stuff that came out in the last month. And this is a book that is superb, is a classic. Absolutely everybody should have this in your library. If you don't, you should go and get one. We'll sell you one too. We have signed book plates, I'm just saying. But it's ElfQuest and it's terrific. And we are so pleased to have Wendy and Richard Pini here to talk with us about the book and their lives and history and stuff. Welcome.
Well, it's
Hi
good to
there.
be. That's a very snazzy intro you got for us there.
Very much.
Thanks. So my first question always is, and it's my favorite question of all, why comics? Of all the things that you could be doing, what was it that led you to comics particularly as your primary way of wanting to communicate?
Well, I never intended to be a comic book artist or writer. It was a big accident. It's like an over 40-year accident.
When Wendy told me the bare bones idea for ElfQuest, and this would be back in the spring of 1977, she sat me down and she said, I have this big story inside of me and here it is, and what do you think we should do with it? And of course, the first idea that screamed out was, oh, this needs to be an animated, like 60-hour movie, but
Right.
Nobody was making those. And we thought about writing it in prose.
Yeah.
But you see, Wendy was already such an accomplished artist that prose by itself would not have done justice to all of the wonderful art that's happened in ElfQuest for the past 40-something years.
Richard and I had both been Marvel Comics fans since our mid-teens, and we had certain comics that we were very fond of. And also I was an intense animation fan. I loved cartooning and just, did it all the time anyway, just for fun. So we talked about different ways to present ElfQuest, and we just landed on that probably the best way to tell the story was with both words and pictures.
Yeah.
So what's that? That's a comic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so what did you draw on comic-wise before that point?
Well, I had been involved in comic fandom. I was a member of an apazine called Kappa Alpha. It's very famous. One of the first mimeographs and all that. Mm-hmm. And I drew various little comics that appeared in Kappa Alpha, and I would draw comics for my own amusement. And I even sent some sample art into Marvel when I was 17 years old.
Oh, wow.
And I actually got a letter back from Saul Brodsky saying that Stan was very impressed and they were interested. Now, can you imagine how a 17-year-old would react to that?
Sure.
It blew my mind.
Yeah.
But of course, I was too young, and the decision was, and I even agreed with it, that I wasn't ready.
Yeah.
But I was tremendously encouraged.
Yeah. So one of the things I was trying to get at with that is ElfQuest is a really ambitious work. This is not a light world. This is not a light set of circumstances. And for someone who hadn't really been drawing comics before that, this seems like an awful ambitious bite to take,
Well, sometimes you start in on a project and you don't know what you're getting yourself into.
That's the truth.
The story that Wendy told me was in essence what we're now calling the original quest.
Yep.
It comprises the first 20 issues of the original ElfQuest comic, and in fact, originally, it was only going to be 14 or 15 issues. What happens in the process between planning and doing is that sometimes the characters and the world and the situations take over and they grow like kudzu and they demand more screen time. But all we wanted to do at first was tell this certain story and not go broke in the process.
Yeah.
And very long story, very short. That's what we did.
Yeah.
And that was only the first step.
Well, ElfQuest was a story that always had a beginning and a middle and an end. We knew where we wanted to get to. We had no freaking idea how many side trips we were going to take.
Right.
But we knew pretty much how the story was going to end, and we needed to get there, and it just took a lot longer than we expected it was going to.
Yeah, I mean, this was a highly unusual thing for comics at the time. I don't know that I can think of any contemporary work at the time that was designed with a beginning, a middle, and an end, other than maybe Cerebus. And I don't believe that Dave actually came up with the idea of ending it for 5 years after he started it. So I suspect you guys were there first.
Well, Dave started Cerebus a month or two before we did. We had no idea he existed. He had no idea we existed. Yeah. And call it parallel intuitive development. We both had these big stories that wanted to be told, and they were epic in scope, and they, however you arranged it, did and do have beginnings and middles and endings.
Yeah.
What we discovered along the way was you can have a part of an epic that has a beginning and a middle and an end, but then that part connects to other parts that have beginnings and middles and ends.
Yes.
And then there's this overarching huge thing with a grand finale ending.
Yeah, ElfQuest is told in chunks, but those chunks all relate together. And when you go back and read the whole thing as one fell swoop, you realize, oh my gosh, all these clues were planted toward the beginning, and then they get resolved at the end. And
that's one of our most favorite things. The most recent completed chunk was called Final Quest, and there are all sorts of things in Final Quest that we get to say to the readers. Now, you see that bit there? I want you to go back to the original quest in issue number 8, page whatever, or Siege at Blue Mountain, or Kings of the Broken Wheel. See what we did there? 30 years later, this is where it led.
Yeah.
And we knew that, and you didn't.
Yeah. And you did know that then? You had a good idea that you were going to revisit that, like you were actually planting the seed?
Yeah, we planted clues to really specific and strong story elements that we knew we wanted to follow through and resolve by the ending. We knew certain things were going to happen.
Yeah.
And quite frankly, part of it is our relationship with our audience. We have this incredible, caring, highly involved audience that we love dearly. And there were some things in the story that we knew we were going to have to prepare them for. Some things would be a little bit hard to take. Richard and I don't believe in just spoon feeding an audience. We like to take a story where it's logical for it to go. And we also have a philosophy about fantasy, which is that it is really a way of commenting on real life. Absolutely. And things that happen in real life. It's a way of examining social problems and human nature. Otherwise, I don't really see the purpose of fantasy. I mean, I don't care for dragons and unicorns.
And it has to build your life around elves.
Yes, but they are not really elves. They are actually shape-shifting aliens. So there's a sci-fi element to ElfQuest too.
Right.
And so, some of the story we knew was going to be kind of tough on the audience. And so part of planting the clues was sort of preparing people for what was going to happen.
Sure.
It's always been very important to us to be honest in the telling of the story.
Yeah.
One of the most egregious examples of the way a story should not be told, in my never to be humble opinion, was the Batman, Joker, Jason Todd, Robin, does he live or die? You vote.
Sure. Sure.
Excuse me?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a gimmick. It's a gimmick.
Yeah.
No, the story is the story, and characters live and die by their actions, and sometimes by blind fate. But it's got to be honest, and if nothing else, we've tried to be honest for all of these years.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's, I mean, obviously, you know, when outside companies own characters and they don't necessarily treat them with honesty and sincerity, you know, because they're just trying to milk them and make as much money as they can rather than necessarily tell the best story.
And we don't put them down for that. We totally get it. You've got to reboot a franchise if you want to keep it going forever. Richard and I never intended to keep ElfQuest going forever. We just wanted to keep it going till we got to the end of the story.
Right. Yeah. No, and I always think that's the better way to approach things, you know, for good or ill. You know, I'll happily criticize them for that. So, one of the things when I was researching that I saw was that you're a San Franciscan, Wendy.
Well, I was born there and adopted 6 weeks later and taken away to the wilds of Gilroy, California. Prunes and garlic.
Garlic, yeah, love it. But still, you're a San Franciscan. There's not a lot of people who actually can say that they're right. Most San Franciscans aren't San Franciscans. That's the thing.
Most San Franciscans are not born there. No.
Absolutely.
That's true.
Yeah. So to have one, that's kind of cute. You guys met via letter column that you saw a letter that she had written in an issue of Silver Surfer. Yeah.
Yes. This is one of those legendary things that I think many people today will not be able to appreciate the insane luck with which this happened, because now social media, you can have thousands of friends you've never met, and you can mix and match relationships like crazy. But in early 1969, all there was comics printed on paper and with letter columns that had letters and actual addresses of the letter writers in them. And I was going to my first year at MIT in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and I picked up, as I was wont to do every Tuesday, Silver Surfer number 5, and there was a very interesting and thoughtful letter in there. It wasn't your standard letter. It wasn't who's stronger, the Thing or Thor or the Hulk. It was a letter almost taking Stan to task for being a little too harsh on the character of the Silver Surfer, portraying humanity as pretty much unrelentingly nasty to this stranger in a strange land. And I thought, wow, now there's a different letter. And that was half of the allure. The other half was that the letter writer was named Wendy, and in 1969, maybe there were, 3 females who read comic books that were out in the wild. So I was intrigued by the letter, and I said, what have I got to lose but an 8-cent airmail stamp? So I wrote a letter in to the address that was printed. Those were gentler, kinder times.
Right.
And lo and behold,
can't imagine that today, right? Like, can't even imagine people doing that.
Well, I mean, you broadcast an email, you put it on Facebook, and 10,000 people are going to see it.
No, you don't want every Tom, Dick, and in that case, knowing where you live nowadays.
So, and lo and behold, a few days later, a letter came back. I mean, not my letter, a reply came back. And I opened it up, and not only had she written a letter in reply, but she had sent a piece of her artwork. It was a drawing of Triton a la Jack Kirby, but in her own very, very unique style. And my little brain exploded. And that began a 4-year correspondence.
Wow. That's like the happiest story of comics that I think I've ever heard. I don't know. I like that so much.
It's very romantic,
Yeah.
and
I have
to
nerdish sort of way.
I have to tell you that I got dozens of letters from guys all over the United States and Canada who wanted to meet a girl who read comics.
Right.
And they told me about themselves and color of their eyes and just TMI generally.
Right.
But this one, what his letter said was, now this is a dating tip, even today in 2021.
Yeah.
His letter said, I really liked what your letter that got printed had to say, but if you want to know more about me, you're going to have to write me, and I promise you surprises await. That's what he said. And he was the only one who did that.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh,
so he intrigued me.
Yeah. I wonder about fandom not before the internet. I was around before the internet, but back in the day when you guys started getting involved in fandom, what was the initial way, other than literally directly rating one another, how did you learn about APAs and things like that? Because certainly, I didn't know about them. You had to stumble across it somehow.
Well, word of mouth, you start meeting other fans. You meet them at school, but most particularly conventions were starting up.
Right.
I went to my first convention in San Jose, California when I was 16 years old. It was called BayCon.
Mm-hmm.
And you start meeting other people that you realize, oh my gosh, you're not this crazy lonely person who's just too weird for color TV. There are other people who think like you. Yeah. And it's the most wonderful thing in the world. And you start making friends, you start writing to people, you start having phone calls, and you join apazines or it's very similar to today in a way, just with a much more primitive technology. Yeah. But fans to me are still very much the same now as they always were. They still love the same things. They still love talking to each other and dressing up in costumes and talking about the characters and fantasizing about fan fiction. It's very much the same now as it always was.
Yeah. To me, my only thought is that so much of the interaction that you have with fans on the internet in general is with people who are anonymous or are, pseudonymous at least. And you don't necessarily know who you're interacting. Even if someone gives you a full name and a picture, it doesn't actually mean that person is who's on the other end of the thing. And I feel like that didn't happen when people were writing hand letters, right? People were posing as the opposite sex or something like that.
It couldn't be that way, because in order to write a letter, you have to sit down, you have to get a sheet of paper, you have to get a pen, you have to marshal your thoughts, you have to actually write them down. You had to find an envelope and a stamp. You had to send it out, and then you had to have the patience to wait for days and days and days for a reply that might not ever show up.
No instant gratification, that's for sure.
Your letter might get lost. The reply letter might get lost. Mm-hmm. The element of instant gratification, as Wendy just said, did not exist. So it was an investment. It was a real choice. Now you can hit a keystroke or a button or a like or this or that, and 1,000 reactions can go out, but there's very little, in, again, my opinion, very little personal investment in that.
Yeah.
You do it 100 times a day without even thinking. Whereas if you got one of these mimeographed fanzines in the mail that was like 32 pages, and there were comic illustrations, and there were stories, and there were reviews and critiques, you poured over it. You read it.
Yeah.
You read it again, and you engaged.
Yeah, and you got to know the people. And you know, the thing is, ElfQuest just took off like wildfire. We were in the right place at the right time when it launched, and it just went through the roof right from the beginning. And when we started meeting our fans, I mean, that was a shock to begin with, to realize that you had fans of your work that would come to a convention specifically to meet you and get your autograph and all that. All of a sudden, you're in the same room with Neil Adams and John Buscema and Boris Vallejo, and you are signing autographs, right? You know, people who you sort of worshipped as a fan become your peers. It was a lot to process very fast for us. We, quite frankly, I'll be honest with you, we weren't prepared for how fast all this happened. And I think we just constantly felt like we were running to keep up with this thing that was just almost getting out of control.
This is very true, because I'm remembering the first few issues. I had to borrow some money from my parents to print our first issue, and they were skeptical as all get out. And then that issue sold out immediately, and I was able to pay them back inside of a month, and my father didn't know what to do with that, because he was expecting that's lost. That's all gone. And for us, it was 4 months in between issues. We weren't monthly. We weren't even bi-monthly. We weren't even quarterly. It was every 4 months. And again, there is that time lag between when an issue goes out and you don't know who's reading it, and the mail starts to come in. We didn't go to our first convention connected to ElfQuest for 6 or 7 months after it first appeared.
Wow.
And that was our first experience of people coming up to us and say, I really like this. Oh my God, really? I didn't even know.
How was it, like just when the third issue came out, something like that? Is that about right?
No. I remember second issue. We knew Bud Plant and Phil Suling. Bud Plant was a West Coast distributor, and Phil Suling was an East Coast distributor. And they were friends of ours because I already had a reputation as a science fiction and fantasy illustrator, which led them to have confidence in ElfQuest, because we did a ridiculously large run of our first issue. And between the two of them, they took the whole run.
Right.
And the thing just sold like hotcakes, you know. And I think it was by our second issue that we brought out that we went to San Diego Con. We had a table, and we really started experiencing what ElfQuest fandom was like. People were doing costumes of the characters, and you know, just we had hit a nerve with a certain kind of fandom that was different from typical superhero fandom. We attracted a lot of women readers, women and girls, who had really, quite frankly, been looking for something like that. And we attracted people who were not necessarily regular comics fans to begin with. They were more like science fiction and fantasy readers. And they were drawn to ElfQuest, and that drew them into the world of comics and to look for other comics that they could be interested in.
Plus, there was not artwork like Wendy's out there at all in anything. You know, none of the big companies were doing anything like independents and undergrounds were idiosyncratic as hell. But there was something about Wendy's artistic style of storytelling and execution that just reached out and grabbed something in a whole lot of people who didn't necessarily go for the, you know, the bulging biceps and the capes and cowls.
ElfQuest has been called America's first manga because I was a child of Jack Kirby and Osamu Tezuka, the creator of Astro Boy and Kimba the White Lion, Walt Disney of Japan. He's considered. Jack Kirby taught me, just by studying his artwork, taught me strength and bulk and how to give characters weight and movement and how to do action scenes. That was a tremendous inspiration for me. Tezuka taught me the line of beauty, the delicacy, and taking a very delicate approach to storytelling, subtlety. So that is really the essence of the artwork of ElfQuest, is my two main influences.
Yeah.
And
can I ask, how were you exposed to Tezuka at that point in the 60s?
I have to thank Fred Patton, who was an extremely well-known comics fan at the time. I met him and corresponded with him, and let him know that I was very interested in an animated film that had come out in 1961 called Alakazam the Great, which was directed by Osamu Tezuka. Mm-hmm. And Fred educated me about who Tezuka was and helped me to obtain other Tezuka material, because where could you get manga back then? You'd have to go to San Francisco to Japantown or Los Angeles to, and I couldn't do that. I had never left Gilroy in my life.
Right.
So Fred helped me obtain some of that material, and I started looking on TV for wherever the Tezuka shows were popping up, like Kimba and Astro Boy. I would watch them, and that's how I kind of educated myself to that drawing style and that style of storytelling.
Yeah. Where were you getting your comics from in Gilroy? Just like a news
Steinmetz Pool Hall.
The pool hall.
Yeah. I would walk. Our house was across the tracks. I grew up on a ranch across the tracks. I would walk across the tracks, walk into town, and the seediest part of town to Steinmetz's Pool Hall, because they had a huge magazine rack, and it was mostly girly mags and stuff like that. But lined up in no particular order would be the comics, and I would go and I would get my Marvels.
Yeah, and what caught your eye with those Marvels in the first place? I mean, I know why they're good. It's very unusual for that to happen, for a young lady to be attracted to what are essentially male power fantasies for the most part.
Yes. However, there's Jack Kirby and the combination of Stan and Jack and their type of storytelling. And the first comic that attracted me was Fantastic Four.
Yeah.
And the reason it did was because it was about a family.
Yeah.
And I was obsessed with stories about finding who your real family is, finding your place in the world, being different, struggling with how the world looks at you because you're different, and yet somehow coming together and making a team, a family out of it, and supporting and helping each other. And those are exactly the kind of stories that Stan and Jack told. Yeah. And then they came up with the Inhumans. And I was like, oh my God, they all have pointed ears. I'm there, because I've always loved elves. So,
And another thing that Marvel did differently, and this is what hooked me, because I was, being a guy, I was more toward the power and the superheroics. But I remember the first Fantastic Four that I picked up. Not only was it a family of, and not a terrifically functional family, either. The Justice League, they were just always so nice to each other, and they got along so well. And the Fantastic Four, Ben Grimm was grouchy, and Reed and Sue were. Anyway, I got to the end of that issue, and it was a cliffhanger. Mm-hmm. And I went, holy crap. I'm not finished. If this was a DC comic, I would have gotten 3 8-page stories that were all very neat and complete and tied up. And I had to go back next month for the next issue. And that one ended on a cliffhanger.
And you were able to find it, Richard? You actually were able to find the next issue easily?
Oh, well, see, I had my equivalent of Steinmetz Pool Hall.
Okay.
Because I cringe to admit this, but what the hell, it's not the first time. When I was 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old, my parents made me take accordion lessons.
Okay.
Because my mother had played the accordion and her mother had played the accordion, so damn it, I was going to play the accordion. And the only thing that made that excruciating experience bearable was that the studio where I went to take the lessons was right across the street from a drugstore. And they had the comic spinners.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And so I would go in there while I was waiting to strap on the stomach Steinway, and I would, pick up the next issue of the Fantastic Four. And that's where I found all the Marvel comics. And that's what got me to be a Marvel zombie long before that was a term.
Yeah,
but
I just during when it was 10 years later, obviously, but when I was buying comics off the newsstand as a kid, the thing that always frustrated me is that I wouldn't be able to find the next issue, right? Because it was spotty. Distribution wasn't rock solid. The store might get Fantastic Four 57, and it might not. It just might not get it.
I was a fan without knowing I was a fan, and I wasn't enough of a fan to know that could be a problem. Every month they had the next issue. So I got lucky, and I came in right when the Fantastic Four was riding a tsunami of wonderfulness. It was the beginning of the Inhuman saga, and that led into the Galactus trilogy, and that and what a hell of a time to get on the ride. It was cliffhanger after cliffhanger after cliffhanger.
And speaking of spinners, going back to where could a girl find comics back in the mid 60s? Well, every time I went shopping at Safeway with my mother, grocery shopping, the spinners would be there in the grocery store.
Oh, sure.
And I could, and you could just flip through and find your comics. And we were both Marvel collectors in our mid to late teens, definitely.
But see, all of this leads back to ElfQuest because the whole concept of an issue that leads you to the next issue, that leads you to the next issue, was baked into ElfQuest from the very beginning.
Cliffhangers. We love cliffhangers.
Yeah. Well, it's one of the most powerful things about comics, right? Like the serialized storytelling. It's exciting. It's thrilling.
You get to think of it. You get to think about the story that you take in, and then you get to try and imagine what's going to happen next, and then you can't wait to find out if what you think might happen really happens. It's exciting.
I was having this conversation. I don't even remember about what show with my son, because he grew up. He's 18 now, and he grew up in the era of you turn on Netflix and you watch all 16 episodes on the same day because you can.
Binge watching, yes.
Right, and trying to explain to him like. We could only watch these things weekly, and we actually had to make an appointment to watch a show. Like, you had to actually put work into being a fan of whatever you were a fan of, comics, television, music, whatever it was. You had to work at it, and today, it's better in one level that you can get all of these things, but it makes weaker fans, right? Like they have less muscles because they haven't done the hard work to learn a thing, to really. Wendy, you look like you're doubting me.
No, I am taking it in, and I am agreeing with you, and I'm thinking about how do I phrase this politely.
Oh, don't bother.
It's all good.
It seems like fans today are massive consumers, but not massive digesters. It seems like they don't digest the thing they take in before they go on to the next thing. They'll say, oh, I binge watched 6 episodes of so-and-so. Now what's the next thing? And it's like they haven't even taken in what they've already, and they don't seem to have the discretion to realize when they are seeing something that's pure junk. There's some terrible storytelling out there right now because I think that all these different competing Cablevision, they all are just in this incredible hurry to get as much material out there as possible. And what's happening is it's not the fans that are weak. Excuse me while I get on my soapbox. It's the material that's weak.
Yeah.
Really weak. Really unbearably, like, why did I waste my life on this thing? Weak.
Yeah.
And yet they don't seem to have much discretion about that. They'll just say, "Oh, that was okay. Now what's the next thing?" Yeah. That's not the way to, make your brain sharp. It's a way to sort of put your gray matter to sleep. And I worry about that. I truly do.
Oh, I do too. Especially as a store that what we sell is stories, right? Like, people actually have to engage with stories. But it's what I love about comics, right? Because engaging with a work like this is, it's a serious commitment to engage with this in all the right ways, I think. Especially, I love these black and white editions. I really do. I know why, commercial reasons why you did color, but man, do I like this book in black and white so much.
Oh, let's rave about these black and whites.
This is how she did the artwork originally. Yeah. This is how we first published it originally, and she was committed to doing the very best with black and white that could be done. And that takes a lot of decisions that you don't need to think about or to make if all you need to do is hit a Photoshop filter and you get a spectacular effect. The light and the shadow, the heaviness of the line, the thinness of the line, the brokenness or the smoothness, all of those have to be thought out really, really carefully.
Yeah. Yeah, and obviously, you work on paper. Do you work anything digital today? Or?
No, I've actually been digital since 2002.
Okay.
I've worked digitally since then. Taught myself, and it is a tremendous tool and a tremendous time-saving tool. Yeah. My biggest bugbear is deadlines. I have a very strong work ethic. Yeah. And I believe in eating deadlines, because I'm very much aware that if I screw up on my end, it screws up all the other people on their schedules that, down the line. And so, very much like my hero Cutter, I have an overdeveloped sense of responsibility. So meeting deadlines has always been something that, has kind of driven me. And that's why the digital tool, being able to draw on a Cintiq and color and so forth, it's a tremendous time saver. Back in the day, if you spilled a bottle of ink on a page, that page was gone and you'd have to start over again. Right. With digital, if you screw up, you can go back through history and you can start over again. It's very forgiving. And so I would have to say there would be a lot less ElfQuest in the world right now if it weren't for digital. Okay. Some people complain, I constantly hear the "I liked your old work better" thing, but really, drawing digitally is just the same as drawing on paper. You're just drawing with pixels instead of lead or ink. Yeah. And it really enables you to get on with it.
I think often there's a certain kind of physicality that comes from ink on paper, though. I agree with you that it's much faster to do it digitally, but I can see that these were drawn on paper. I don't know how to explain that otherwise.
You're absolutely correct, and this is an interesting topic of discussion and debate. I live on both sides of that fence. I absolutely am enchanted by the work that Wendy has done. That's pencil on paper, ink on paper, paint on paper. That said, one of Wendy's mantras from a very, very early age, what she wanted to do, what she always wanted to do, she has said, was to paint with light, was to make paintings with light. Now, you can't do that even with beautiful oils or beautiful alkyds or beautiful whatevers on paper, because it's reflected. Once you move to digital, now you are actually painting with light, because it's light coming through the little pixels on your monitor screen. And so she's able to get certain effects that are impossible when not doing it digitally. So there's something wonderful to be said for either technique.
Yeah, I wasn't coming down on one side or the other, to be honest.
No, we knew that.
I was merely saying that this is gorgeous. This is really fantastically gorgeous.
Thank you.
For what that's worth.
I love the fact that through these beautiful black and white volumes that Dark Horse is reprinting, I just love the fact that new readers are discovering it, and we're getting feedback like, "Where has this been all my life?" I would have loved to have known years ago that this existed. So Dark Horse is really, again, just like Marvel did back in the mid 80s, Dark Horse is helping us find new readers that have been looking for something exactly like ElfQuest all along.
And not realizing it, And it's also the amazing thing about this particular edition, and of course it's because you've already paid for all the creative costs, but 720 pages for $25. I mean, that's insane. That's crazy. And it's
quite a buy.
Yeah, it's quite a buy. It is a bargain, and the fact that it's good work, it's not just good work, it's exceptional work, makes it even better. Let me ask you some questions maybe about your process and approaching the blank page. So in the beginning, there's nothing. You have an idea in your head. You know what you want to do. Do you write a script first? Do you start thumbnailing first? What's your process to go from blankness to something?
First thing we do is we talk story. We get in the car, we drive somewhere, or we just sit down over a pizza or whatever, and we talk story. I tell Richard what's going to happen in a particular issue. We flesh it out. We argue. We decide which characters are going to come forward the most. We decide how best to tell the story. And then I will write a rough treatment. And from that rough treatment, I will break that into pages. And so every day I go to my Cintiq and I know which page. I don't always work in order. In fact, it's been a habit of mine actually never to work in order. I go to when I can envision, sometimes I'll wake up in the morning and the first thing I'll have is an idea of, that's the solution to that scene. I want to get to that scene. And so that's how I decide which page I'm going to do on a given day. But I do have a treatment broken into pages for each issue that I do, and that's how I know what each issue is going to contain, because we've talked the story through and broken it into pages.
Yeah.
Then I don't do thumbnails. I just get right to it. I'll do some very rough blue lines, then some tighter pencils, and then either I will ink or my magnificent assistant, Sunny Straight, will do the inking. And, it just goes from there. ElfQuest is second nature. We've been doing it for so long now that it's just second nature of the process of doing it. Once the artwork is done, or mostly done. In other words, once it's in a visual form, all the pages, then Richard and I sit down again and we go over the script and we polish and tighten up the script. and we make sure that all the voices are just as they should be. And one of the things that I love about Richard's editing, and I've always loved it, is he believes in using as few words as possible. Comic storytelling, you should show it more than you tell it. If you have a page full of 1,000 balloons, you're in trouble. You know, that people should be able to look at the artwork and kind of have an idea on each page what's happening in the story. So this is one of the things that Richard brings to it is, you know, sometimes I have a tendency to overwrite, and he will say, you know, you could say this in a lot less words. And
there are times when I say, do we really need words here at all?
Yeah.
And we'll look at it and you'll say, oh my God, yeah, no, we don't need new words at all. So it's really a back and forth kind of thing.
Oh, sometimes he gets physical about it. Is like, no, just leave that piece of art alone. Don't you dare put words to that. You know.
Guilty.
We get very emotional.
So let me ask a question about your process in terms of working on pages out of order. One of the most important tools in comics is the page turn, and you know, particularly you talk about, you know, loving cliffhangers. Well, every single page turn is a cliffhanger, right?
You're absolutely right. Every page
16 cliffhangers, right?
Exactly. So, every page should be like a little rope pulling the reader to the next page. They want to know what happens next.
Yeah. So I wonder how you square that, and it's not even something you square necessarily, but between doing pages out of order and then having to have that beat at the turn. Did that question make sense? I'm not an artist. I can only sort of ask artist questions.
What my mind goes back to is working with John Byrne on an issue we called Hidden Years 9.5, and it was 40 pages of rock'em sock'em bloody knock your teeth out battle between Cutter and his foe Rayek, and it was about revenge. And I joked with John. I said, you know, I wanted John to ink the pencils, because I said, you know, I have a problem with doing like wounds and, you know, suffering. It's hard to draw, but John had no problem with it at all. So we gave him the nickname of Wound Wrangler, and. And so as the story progresses and Rayek and Cutter are beating the tar out of each other through this whole 40 pages comic, I did, as usual, do the pages out of order. And John understood that. He works like that sometimes. Yeah. But it was his job to make sure that as the story progressed, the wounds progressed correctly. So if Cutter had a bruise on page 20, you know, it should be even worse on page 30. Right.
That's the whole continuity in the movie, you know. But that's the thing about breaking down the issue into pages. Even if the layout of the page or the treatment of the page is very rough, every page still says how it ends. Every page has an indication of what's the cliffhanger, what's the hook at the end of this page, and how's it going to lead into the next page. Even if it's, you know, 6 words, we know what it is on every page. So she can go out of order and still know the page before that led to it and where it leads.
I mean, again, we are so practiced at it that as of today, ElfQuest is just a story that tells itself. You know.
Yeah, I wonder about these early issues though, and I wonder about because, you know, I mean, I can see, as a guy who reads a lot of comics, you know, the first couple of pages of the first couple issues it's a little rough in a couple places, like the pacing and the storytelling, you know, because you're still figuring out how it works. You know, when was the point that you started feeling that level of confidence and that level of it's just second nature, and I don't have to think about it necessarily anymore?
Issue number 3 of the Classic Quest was my epiphany.
Yeah.
You know, issue number 3 is where I felt command of my material. And I was really, really into the story. I just really wanted to tell this story, and I knew how I wanted it to go. I could see it in my head like an animated movie running.
Yeah.
And I just knew how I wanted it to play. And so my instincts for, you know, camera angles and pacing and all of that just really seemed, and actually the readers seemed to notice too. The feedback we got on issue 3 was the most voluminous that we had gotten so far. People's reactions were very strong, very powerful, and they realized that they were really involved now in something that was going to be an epic story. There was a lot going on here, and it was going to take a lot to tell it.
Yeah.
That said, though, you brought a toolkit. Even before you started drawing the first issue, you had a toolkit that you had built up. As she likes to tell me all the time that she's a human walking video recorder. And this is true artistically, at least. If she would watch cartoons and watch animated series like Johnny Quest and all the wonderful Warner Brothers cartoons, and somehow record them as she was watching and deconstruct them frame by frame as she was watching, so that the tricks of a good director or a good designer got somehow implanted into your artistic psyche.
He brought up Johnny Quest. I mean, I must list Doug Wildey among really strong influences of mine. Johnny Quest completely blew my mind. I had never seen anything like it in my life. I couldn't get enough of it, and I just drew those characters, and I studied Doug Wildey's use of spotting blacks in particular. I think the thing I learned the most from Doug was how to spot blacks, because he literally drew the show.
Yeah.
Doug drew Johnny Quest. I mean, it's mostly his artwork. And you can tell, you can just tell these powerful, strong lines and black shadows. You know, it was just power, and I really, really was attracted to that and wanted to incorporate that into my work. But also there was the storytelling. You know, it was
in the very first issue. I mean, you say in issue 3, you hit your stride.
Yes.
But in the very first issue, inside of the very first 2 or 3 pages, you're doing movie cinematography tricks like the smash cut from then to now.
That's true.
Boom, same pose.
Yeah.
Time jump.
Yes, that was kind of a cinematic trick to do.
But you had that. You knew that stuff.
Yeah, I knew that stuff.
Yeah. But it's, you know, there's a difference between knowing it and then it just becoming second nature, I think, you know. It's like anything, you do it for a while and then you start actually getting good at it, you know. Not that you weren't good before, you know what I'm saying. I don't want that to
I
not
do.
feel like a compliment, you know.
No, practice. It just, you practice until things become second nature, and then you have to stay aware so you don't get stale.
Yeah.
You know, when things become second nature, you have to watch yourself to see if you're repeating yourself.
Yeah.
And is there a more interesting way you can tell this particular part of the story?
Yeah.
It becomes easy to fall back on things you've done before that worked. And I always try to avoid that. I always try to do something new every issue.
Yeah. What's the challenge of that? I mean, is it something that you're like genuinely struggling with to come up with new ideas, or is it just still coming the way it did.
Again, he brought up the human VCR thing. Sometimes I think I'm like a camera. I'm like a director with a camera. All right, so I have a scene, for example, that I could show as a medium shot of two characters talking to each other. I could also do an extreme close-up where most of their faces are cut off and maybe they're just nose to nose. I could show it from the backs of their heads and let the audience imagine what their facial expressions would be. Mm-hmm. You have so many options that give you different emotional tones. And if nothing else, ElfQuest is about emotion. If nothing else, it's about emotion. I really want to evoke emotions in the readers and have them really be with the characters and understanding why they're doing what they're doing and what they're feeling. It's an emotional experience. You give the reader that emotional experience by deciding what's the best angle to draw a particular panel or sequence of panels that will tell them what is happening inside the characters. It's not always a close-up. Mm-hmm. It's not even always a full featured drawing. Sometimes it's a silhouette. Mm-hmm. So you make decisions like that, and it's such a rich smorgasbord of imagery to choose from. I never seem to run out.
Another aspect of that is that ElfQuest is a very personal story. Mm. We've gone on record as saying that it's more or less autobiographical. Some is very, very point for point, and some of it's really vaguely metaphoric. But how a scene gets portrayed sometimes depends on how we feel about that scene as it relates to us or some aspect of us.
We're going into dangerous territory here because he knows whereof he speaks. ElfQuest is quite autobiographical, and there are things in ElfQuest that are literal fantasy translations of conversations he and I have had or experiences he and I have had that were so powerful that we're still processing them. And part of the way we processed them was to put them into the story. I'll give you an example.
Please.
There was an incredible thunderstorm. This is some years back. And we were standing on our front porch, one of those just deluge, crashing thunder, lightning. And I love that kind of thing. We both love it. However, 30 feet away, all of a sudden, kapow! A lightning bolt comes down and hits our yard.
Wow.
If we had been standing on the lawn, you would not be having this conversation right now.
Right.
You could smell the ozone. It was this entire sensory experience, and realizing that 30 feet away, that was your death. Mm-hmm. So we put it into an issue of ElfQuest, two elf characters just having fun dancing in the rain, and kapow! One gets taken out by a bolt of lightning, and the readers were like, "What are you doing? That's not possible." And so we told them, "You want to know what really happened?"
Sure.
And
that also informs the light, the shadow, the close-up, the silhouette, the long shot, all of those things.
That's not. Yeah, they're driving past. We're on a busy street, so they moved on. They went somewhere else.
There was two other people. Yeah. All of the feelings that we felt informed how you could only draw certain scenes in a certain way for maximum impact to get the most emotion out of it based on what you felt. And if you do that well and honestly, your reader will share in that.
I will tell you, in drawing that sequence, we didn't use any words. Right. It was just kapow and what happened, and the pictures told it. So we take aspects experiences in our lives. And that's part of the way we process them is to put them into this fantasy metaphor and share it with people.
Yeah. And I know it was many years ago. Can you remember all these years later what the first part of the story, what came to you, whether it was the quest to bring the tribes together, or whether it was the image of wolf riders, or if there was one particular thing that sort of led you down the path to coming up with the rest of the story? Does that make sense as a question?
What do you think?
Because I'm assuming it didn't spring like Aphrodite from your brow, right? It was a process.
No, I had been telling stories about tribes of little alien critters since I was a child. The elves weren't always the elves. There was a period in my early teens where they were these little insect people with wings. And I was telling this story called The Rock Garden, and everything happened in the rock garden. But it was the elves. They were just in a different form.
This is not telling anything out of school. Wendy was adopted. And life in the Fletcher household was not always rosy and peaches and cream. And she began telling stories, all of which had a common theme, which is finding family, finding place, finding safety, finding others who are like yourself.
Yeah.
And there are at least half a dozen different iterations of that theme. All of that fermented and then came to a head in her sitting me down and saying, here's ElfQuest, and it's about this group, and they are threatened, and they live in this dangerous place, and they don't know if they're alone or not, but they want to find out. And the arc of the original quest is first them finding that they're not alone, and then finding their ancestral home of sorts, and finding a kind of safe haven. So that part of it, that was all of a piece from the beginning. As Wendy said, we knew where it was going to begin, we knew where it was going to end. Side trips could happen, but that aspect of it was there.
In the mid-70s, there was this boom of fantasy and geekdom that had never happened before. Star Wars, Ralph Bakshi's Wizards and Lord of the Rings. There was this validation that all of us who loved fantasy and science fiction got like we had never gotten before. I mean, I remember seeing Star Wars for the first time. I had never seen an audience rise to its feet and applaud and lose its mind at a movie before. That was a phenomenon. And we were all excited about the fact that fantasy and science fiction were coming into their own, and suddenly it was something that was being taken seriously and not something you read under the sheets with a flashlight. Another thing Richard didn't bring up is that I did not receive encouragement for my work from my family. My family did not approve of fantasy, cartoons, comic books, or the type of things I like to draw. It was not appropriate for a girl to do these things. That was the kind of family I grew up in. Everything was no. You know, why don't you do still life? Why don't you draw and paint like this person or that person? Why do you have to do this stuff that we can't brag about because nobody will understand it? That was my experience in my family. And so there was this feeling of just being an outsider. And suddenly here comes Star Wars. Here comes Lord of the Rings, you know. And the validation gave courage.
Yeah.
And so that's what made me sit down and tell him this story. And because I felt like the time could be right for it finally, after all this time.
Yeah. And let me follow up on that because you did go on to be quite successful following your dream. And I wondered, did your family come to terms with that? Were they eventually happy for you?
It was my fate. It was my fate to always miss the boat with my family. My mother passed away just as I was starting ElfQuest. She only ever saw a few pages of it, and her reaction was the typical reaction she had always had to my work. My father, God bless him, lived on into his 90s, but it was a very distant relationship, and he was not interested. He was, we never talked about the story. I think he was proud enough to display the comics on the coffee table, but we just never talked about it. And my brother, that's a whole nother story I won't even get into.
And it was it was the same in my family.
Yeah, his family too.
I said early on that I had to approach my parents for some money to publish our first issue, and it was very grudging that they lent us the money, and they, as I said, were very surprised when we paid it back inside of a month. But like Wendy, like her parents, mine just never got what we were doing.
Not only did his parents not approve of comics and fantasy, they didn't approve of me.
I'm sorry to hear that. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to take this conversation.
No, this is good. See, we have always shared stuff like this because we really love people to know that, like if you feel different, if you feel like the people you grew up with didn't understand you, that doesn't mean that you're defeated.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that you have to take it in and own that. Yeah. That's just their problem. It's not your problem.
Exactly.
So we love to tell these stories.
Okay.
And
I just didn't want to probe.
No.
Oh no.
It was always a small a source of frustration that every time we did something that we were incredibly proud of, we would bring it to them and say, this is what we've done, the most recent thing. And we had history. And it was, oh, that's nice.
Yeah, real indifference. So, we just kind of had to forge our own way. But my goodness, the people that we did meet and the way that we were embraced, it was like a miracle. And very motivating.
I would hope that you would feel all of your fans and all of stores like mine, and like we're all part of your extended family in that sense, because we're all on the same page in terms of bringing great stories and coming together and telling those stories. And the creator has always mattered as much to me as anything in comics. I don't own a comic book store. I mean, I like superhero comics, but I don't own a comic book store to sell superheroes. I own a comic book store to support people like you who make art, and to get your art out there. That's what the job is.
It's a synergy. What we haven't brought up that I must say, and I know he will too, is that one of the things that helped us the most in the beginning was the uprising of the comic shops.
Market, yeah.
The word of mouth through those was another tremendous thing that helped us out.
Absolutely true, because ElfQuest began in '78. I think the direct markets really started to take off in the earlier '70s.
Yeah.
But for a long time, the field was wide open, and it was like finding gold, and then there are hills, and above San Francisco, we struck gold, and the synergistic mixing of the growth in this number of stores, people wanting to get into this brand new business that was very exciting, plus the reaction to ElfQuest, largely in part of because of Wendy's art. It was lightning in a bottle, and we give thanks every day.
Yeah, it was a thing we all kind of experienced and grew together. The independent comics movement grew as we grew, because we were there at the beginning, which is there were 2 or 3 or 4 at most when we started out, and it began to grow, and the independent comics movement became something that was completely associated with the direct market. That's where we found our audiences.
Yeah.
And, we were doing something separate from the mainstream comics.
Absolutely.
It was another.
Oh, go ahead.
No,
No, I was just going to say, I just remember something you Brian said earlier. You couldn't be sure going to the pharmacy that they'd have next month's issue of the Fantastic Four, but with the
comic shop, you could. You knew we knew what we were doing. We were ordering all of those issues.
Yes,
that's right.
We would throw a fit if it didn't show up. Right. So yeah.
So that was another thing
there.
It was a wonderful, exciting community then, because everything was just getting off the ground, and it still is. Even today, over 40 years later, it's just a wonderful, exciting community.
Yeah. So there were only a small handful. You said 4. We're not going to spot check that right now. But how did you? Obviously, you said that you knew Bud and you knew Phil, and so that gave you the leg up to they actually stocked your book. But
yes.
But how did you have the courage, the fortitude to go? Not only are we going to make this story, but we're going to own it, and we're going to sell it, and we're going to do all the work all the way. I'm so.
We were too dumb. We were too dumb to know it couldn't be done.
No, well, in addition to that, at the very beginning, you see, Warp Graphics, which is our company, ended up being the publisher, and we still the owner. But in the very beginning, I had no effing clue how to be a publisher, what that involved, bookkeeping, distribution, marketing, any of that stuff. So we took ElfQuest to Marvel and to DC and to a couple of the larger independent titles. And they all said, this is nice, but it's just a little too peculiar for us.
Right.
And so we became the little red hen, and we had to do it ourselves. And it was a crash course in, all right, how do I find a printer? How do I compare costs? And as Wendy said, we knew Bud and Phil from other contexts. They took the complete runs of the first 3 issues. And there were other distributors I didn't know from distribution, but other people, Glenwood and oh my God, I've forgotten the names.
A number of them. Yes.
There were a bunch of them. Capital City.
Yes.
They contacted me and said, "Can we get in on this?" And hey, the more the merrier.
Nice.
To the point where we were shipping tens of thousands of copies. We were up to 100,000 copies of ElfQuest.
And for an independent comic, that was absolutely unheard of.
Absolutely.
And again, we learned by doing. We made mistakes. We learned from them. We invented some new mistakes and learned from them. But what would
you say your not your worst mistake, but the most memorable mistake, maybe?
Oh, I can tell you that. I can tell you that easily. Issue number 7 of the original Quest. We were selling gangbuster numbers. to 6 or 7 distributors. And one day Phil took me aside and said, I'd like to be your exclusive distributor.
Okay.
I will up the order, and knowing as little as I knew and being as naive as I was.
And we were friends with Phil.
And we were
Sure,
friends.
absolutely.
Yeah.
I said, what could go wrong?
Mm-hmm.
Well, so Phil got the entire print run of issue number 7. And I said to the others, I'm doing this with Phil. And my God, the blowback was palpable.
Mm-hmm.
Eyebrows are still singed.
Wow.
We were so naive, we didn't think anybody could get mad at us. Boy, was that a wake-up call.
It was just a lack of knowledge of the depth and the intricacy and the politics and all of the, behind the scenes stuff. And so that arrangement lasted exactly 1 issue, and issue number 8 went back to everybody else, and the numbers kept going up. But I do remember that because it was a tremendous learning experience.
Talk about a wrist slap.
Yeah. So it's funny because in so many ways, you guys have been pioneers of so many things in comics long before anybody else did them. Going exclusive with 1 distributor just being one of those things, right? That's like half the conversation that we have these.
I'll tell you something else.
Yeah, please.
I'll tell you something else. And this, I don't know if it happened to you, but this teed off a whole lot of retailers. It has always been my feeling as a co-creator and a publisher that it's a lot more important that somebody get to read ElfQuest than it is for me to make a few dollars off an inflated sale of a back issue.
Yes.
Issue 1 came out, 2, 3, 4. Issue 1 went out of print. Now, I grew up with Classics Illustrated. Classics Illustrated never went out of print. Mm-hmm. It just reprinted. Now, they may have changed the covers from time to time, but they kept their entire line of comics
Some of them
in print.
Like 22, 23 printings, easily.
So I said, that's my model right there. Issue number 1 is out of print. Number 2 is selling, but I'm hearing from fans saying, I bought number 2. I can't get number 1. Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm going to make number 1 available to you. So I did a 2nd printing, and then I did a 3rd printing. Mm-hmm. And it was $1. The cover price didn't go up. I made the issue available at the cover price. And I heard from retailers saying, you're killing our back issue market.
Sure. Yeah,
I'm sorry. Well, not really.
I'm with you on that one. That's not important. Get more readers coming in because then you actually ultimately create more demand for the first printing because there's more fans looking for the book.
Exactly so. Now, I don't have the fact check to do this, but I suspect, aside from Classics Illustrated, that ElfQuest was the first modern or independent. Well, I know the Undergrounds went back to multiple
I would have
printings.
said that, yeah, absolutely. Like Zap had 15 or 16 printings at least.
Exactly.
Yes, it did.
It was just a point of pride to me that a new reader could go to your shop, get that copy. Who cared about first printings back then? Sure. Except for diehard collectors. I always wanted to make the reading available. That's why all of this stuff is on our website now. Yeah. I want to ask about that one too, but hold on. Let me go in order because I do want to ask about the Starblaze editions and how you guys because it was not at all common then for there to be book collections of album comics. That was not a thing. I mean, there was a couple of things that were like that. But for the most part, that did not happen. So
you had to get them from Europe.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
So who how did that relationship get initiated? I'd love to hear a little bit about this, because this is the part of comics history that fascinates me, that nobody has ever talked about, like that I know about on camera. You know, and fundamentally affects how I do life.
The Dunn and Company, the late unlamented Dunn and Company, operated out of Virginia Beach, I think, Virginia, and they primarily were doing. You know how your town or your city chamber of commerce puts together a book about our town and it's got photos. Well, this company was known for doing that. You could contract with, there's a vanity press kind of thing, but you could contract with them to do a book about your town. They got into the science fiction field doing mostly books by Robert Asprin, the Myth Adventure series. And I don't know how they started getting into there, but they were doing very well with that. One of the editors at that company got in touch with us after the first 2 or 3 or 4 issues of ElfQuest came out and said, I love ElfQuest. We'd like to talk to you about reprinting, but in color, because we want to see how this will do in chain bookstores and mass bookstores. And we thought, that's a great idea. I'm a big believer in recycling. If I can use the same material and get it into a different market or whatever. So we entered into an agreement with them, and they took the original artwork. They made photostats of the artwork.
May I jump in and say, the first hint that things weren't going to go as well as we hoped was that they were not willing to spring for high quality photostats.
Okay.
What they insisted that I and my then assistant Glynis Ween, that's a name of a woman in comics that needs to be remembered. They wanted us to color on, back then it was called Xerox. They wanted us to color on printed Xerox paper. Xerox back then was a kind of a black powder that would make the entire page a little bit gray. So we had to paint on these things.
The materials that they supplied were, let us just say, not entirely worthy of the artwork or of the project. But to their credit, they put together the first book, which collected the first 5 issues in color. And I can't, like you, Brian, I can't recall an earlier instance of this. I know that publishers like Simon & Schuster would collect random stories from DC and Marvel, like the greatest Superman stories of the 50s, that kind of thing, but not an integrated novel, if you will. They got that book out. They got it into Barnes and Noble and Walden Books and Brentano's.
They got it into airports. We would see it in airports of all places.
Right. And, this to me is insane, right? Like suddenly you're in the real. You're not just in comic shops anymore.
No,
you're one of the first people out there into the real world. And I assume that they did well because they continue doing them. Yeah,
they built an entire new wing on their building from us.
I don't know about that, but they did very well. We were consistently in the top, slots of all the bestseller lists and the science fiction magazines and all of that stuff. So of course they were going to do the second and the third and the fourth issues, which ate up all of the material for the original Quest. That was unheard of. The sales were incredible. And without going into detail, the relationship did not survive some questionable practices on their part. But the point is that they got ElfQuest into places other than the comic shops. And people who did not know of comic shops, or who for whatever reason did not want to go into comic shops, would go into a Barnes and Noble.
Oh,
Absolutely.
yeah.
And they'd see ElfQuest there, and they'd discover it, and that might have led them back to comic shops for other things. But again, it's always been about expanding where you can find
I think that
and read our stuff.
those albums, I think, brought in a substantial new female audience. Women were buying those things like crazy because women shopped in bookstores, and they were finding it and they were loving it, and so that really grew
at that period of time, most comic shops were still pretty scary.
Yeah,
and nowadays I find most comic shops are very friendly and inviting. But back then,
Back then
they were like
really
Steinmetz's pool hall. Yes.
Exactly. I remember the first comic shop I ever walked into. I was living in New York. I was like 13 or 14, and my parents took me into Manhattan, and we went to it was called the Bat Cave, and it was literally underneath like a basement thing that you went into, and it had like dripping stalactites in the place because it was it was terrifying and weird. But I'm like, this is a store that sells nothing but comic books. What is this world? This is really exciting.
Isn't that wonderful?
Yeah.
So
no, and when I opened in 1989, almost every comic book store was predominantly a back issue store at that point, because there weren't very many trade paperbacks. There were probably, it was probably in the range of 100 books that were in print around that time. But there were really only 3 that you could count on, knowing that the publisher would actually go back to press on them and that you could keep getting them. And that would be Mouse, Watchmen, and ElfQuest. And I think that's pretty amazing place to be in. I don't know. I've always sort of held that in my heart as, again, pioneers that you were in on the book market before anyone even thought there could be a book market for comics.
Well, and again, the story of our relationship with the Dawning Starblaze Company is long and rocky and will not be told here and now. But to their credit, they got the books into the stores. They cracked that door open. Yeah. And we have to be grateful for that, because that just blew ElfQuest totally into a whole new universe.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there was no looking back after that.
Yeah. Yeah. There's like a whole bunch of other, we're starting to run low on time, I think, because I know it's really late for you guys. We're an hour and a half already. And I could keep going for another 2 hours. This would not be a problem. But let me ask the other question. Actually, I have like 4 or 5 business questions, but let me ask the one that really fascinates me, and you just brought it up a few minutes ago, Richard, is the digital that you 14 years ago, I want to say, put everything online for free.
This was
that was unheard of. No.
Well, but like everything else, there's a reason.
Sure.
This would have been 2009, so we're talking 12 years ago, if my math is correct.
I was close.
Still a bunch of years.
Yeah.
We were published. We had a license with DC Comics from 2003 to 2007. They put out a number of very beautiful archive editions of ElfQuest, and they repackaged it into some manga-sized things because they wanted to jump on the manga craze. But they didn't really know how to market ElfQuest. So when our 4-year agreement with them came to an end, we did not renew it. Now, ironically, the very next year, Warner Brothers, who owns DC, came to us and optioned ElfQuest to be made into a movie. Now, the irony is that if DC had done a little bit better, they would have had the property and they wouldn't have had to, Anyway, the thing about the Warner Brothers option was they did not want us to release any new material while they were supposedly developing ElfQuest, because they wanted any new material to ride the wave of success that the movie would generate, and so on and so forth. You've heard it 100 times.
Yeah.
So we could not create or publish anything new. Well, I knew enough that, 2009, the internet's up and, the web is up and going strong. And if you don't have a presence pretty much month to month, you get forgotten. So I thought, all right, DC and Marvel were just beginning to see how to monetize putting digital comics online. It says, let's put this issue up for 99 cents. Let's try this for a nickel. It says, I don't have the patience or the brains to try to figure all that stuff out. And going back to something I said earlier, I want people to be able to read the thing. Yeah. So over a period of about a year and a half, I sat down at my scanner. I had some help from some fans. I scanned every issue that we had put out, some 300 issues of various titles by that time. And I would upload them, and they're there to this day for free. Because I'm not making any money off of it, but not a day goes by that I don't hear, I discovered it online. Thank you for, now I can read it. Now I can get into it. And now I'll go buy those beautiful big books behind you there, or I will do this. Or
exactly. What he did, what was so brilliant about this gift that he gave to ElfQuest Fandom is that it gained us another whole new audience, just like going with Marvel gained us a new audience back in the mid 80s. Putting it all up online brought in people who had never heard of ElfQuest and just heard about it by word of mouth, or just happened to stumble on it.
See, there's so much available today. That I think any sane person is going to be really kind of careful about where they put their dollars. And I'm saying you don't have to risk a thing. Bring a lunch, because you're going to be on the site for a long time, but you can read the first 30 years of ElfQuest for free. That's an investment as far as I'm concerned.
And and I don't think it is having any effect on Dark Horse's sales of the gorgeous volumes they're doing. And in fact, I think we both like to think that it continues to help.
People still want to hold a book.
Yes.
And I also ultimately think that, reading comics on your computer it's crappy. It's not a good experience. It's not, they don't read the same. The boundaries are different. The page looks different, it's not the same thing at all, and certainly I have absolutely heard people walk in the door of my store and go, I'm here, I read this online. I'm here for the real version. I mean, and I'm not just saying that to make it up, people have said, I want the real version of this comic. So that always to me is a good thing. On
the other hand, one of our favorite things is when Dark Horse releases a new issue online of ElfQuest, and the fans are just waiting for that midnight release, the day before the official release. They sometimes break down the.
They crash the server.
They crash the server. And we love that.
That's funny. You guys were publishing on your own for the longest time, and at one point you had what I want to say were 6 monthly books coming out at a month, in maybe as many as 7 or 8 in 94.
There were some months.
He had a bullpen.
There were some months where Warp Graphics had 10, I wonder if it was ever as high as 12, but let's say 10 monthly issues. There were some months, and I still can't quite believe this, because Diamond would send out previews, and somewhere in there who's number one, Marvel or DC? Who's number two, the other one of Marvel or DC? Who's number three, Dark Horse? And there were months where Warp was number 4.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then, Fantagraphics and
Yeah.
not every month were we number 4, but there were some months when we were just behind Marvel and DC and Dark Horse. And I thought, we're up in a little office building in Poughkeepsie, New York. And what the heck am I doing? Those are some heady times.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, I mean, if I'm going to follow the chronology here, this was 94, 95, you contracted the line. It was because ultimately, I think it was because Heroes World got bought by Marvel and then all the distribution things collapsed. Yes?
I can in my mind, I trace a direct line from what the hell? I'll go out on the limb. When Image broke away, when the guys broke from Marvel and started Image, I mean, that was great. I mean, that's entrepreneurship at its finest.
Well, and creator ownership, which was the thing that we spent a long time fighting for. As an industry.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But what happened, there were a couple of not so good things that happened in my mind. Speculators began going crazy because first issues of this or that were selling millions of copies. Well, I'm going to buy 100,000 copies and they'll be worth $1 million. No, it doesn't work that way.
It literally doesn't work that way. Yeah.
And the scheduling problems, titles coming out late, and the direct market being structured so that you paid for stuff that you weren't getting. And what did we lose? A third of or 2/3? I forget the shops.
So we lost 2/3 of the accounts. But my understanding is, right, because you're right, that this was happening at the same time the speculation thing was happening. Diamond and Capital and all the other distributors were signing up anybody they possibly could. They were getting like coin stores to put a rack of comics in. Stamp stores, whatever.
That's right. Bubblegum cards. Yeah.
Like, because they're collectibles. These are, we're selling you collectibles. Buy into our collectible thing. And then once everybody realized, oh, no, this is all fake and false. This is tulips in Amsterdam, in the 1800s or whenever it was.
Yeah.
That was the biggest part of it was that of the 2/3 of the accounts that closed, they were places that were never comic book stores to begin with. Now, there's no doubt that a quarter or more of the comic shops went away, but I think honestly that a lot of them were not properly comic book stores.
And so, as you properly note, the mid 90s, 95, 96, 97, I was feeling that it was a very heady time, and I just wanted to keep it going as long as I possibly could. But the writing was on the wall, and the numbers were just going down and down and down and down. That's when we started out as WARP, Wendy and Richard Pini, and in the later 90s we contracted back to WARP, and we've been there happily ever since. And having mostly a great time.
But even to the point where you started farming out publishing to DC and then to Dark Horse now. I'm wondering why you decided to do that. Why you
very simply, very, very simply, having been a publisher for I guess close to 30 years. For a company our size, I was doing a whole lot of different tasks. I was wearing a lot of different hats. Yes, I had people to do accounting. Yes, I had people to do bookkeeping and order fulfillment. But I'm the kind of person who, like, oh, let me do it. I can do it. I'm just that type. And so I was spending so much of my time doing what I call the administrivia of running a company that I wasn't doing what we had started out doing all those years before, which was helping to build a world, working with Wendy on these wonderful stories, brainstorming over pizza. And I wanted to get back to that. I really did. As I have said many times, we are independent. We are not isolationist. And if somebody comes along with resources that we don't have, Marvel did it in 1985, DC did it in 2003, Dark Horse did it in 2012. I'll partner with anyone who can help us do what we want, which is get the story out there.
And an awful lot of credit for our current relationship with Dark Horse goes to Mike Richardson.
Yep.
Because he is a persistent son of a gun. He pursued us for literally years.
Oh yeah.
And
he kept asking us, when's your deal with the DC going to be done? When's your deal with Warner Brothers going to be done? Yeah. I want to work with you. And finally, it came to the point where he and I sat down across the table and said, "Let's do this thing."
Yeah.
No, that's great. I certainly appreciate that. Also, just as a little trivia question here, because this struck me while I was researching this. There are exactly 3 comic books that I'm aware of that have been published at Marvel, DC, and Dark Horse.
That's right.
The same content, right? Like Tarzan has had something published at all those companies, but with the same content. It's ElfQuest, it's Brian Michael Bendis' Powers, and it's Moonshadow. Three comics. That's pretty good company, I think.
Well, as you said earlier, ElfQuest, Mouse, and Watchmen. Yep. The 3 titles that you can count on staying in print. I'll take that kind of company any day of the week.
Any day of the week. So let's maybe talk about the future a little bit. The future of ElfQuest. You've got a storyline, Stargazers. Oh God, I'm blanking on it.
Quest.
Stargazers Hunt.
Hunt, not Quest. Thank you. Which 4 issues came out, and then COVID happened. And you have announced that you are not serializing the end of it. It's just going straight to original graphic novel.
This is a decision that we came to with Dark Horse. They, like everybody, got slammed by COVID. And ElfQuest has always done well at Dark Horse. We have always felt that Dark Horse has been quite happy with the sales of ElfQuest, but because of COVID and all the associated problems, they said, we'd really like you to consider letting us just take the last 4 issues and put them out as a book. And I couldn't say no, because I understood what they were asking. And so Wendy and I and Sonny are still working on them as individual issues, because they had already been plotted and laid out. And all of those
was one of my questions was, did it change anything about the story? So I guess not.
Let me jump in and say that for Sonny and me working on the artwork, I think that Volume 2 is more cohesive. Yeah, we are still approaching it as individual issues, but there's an overall vision for Volume 2 of Stargazer's Hunt that makes it more of a graphic novel read in one sitting that I'm very excited about. The way the artwork has turned out. I'm working on the last issue with Sonny. We're almost done, and the way it has turned out, it's really some of our best. And I think the idea of it coming out all as a cohesive book has really kind of influenced how we're approaching the work.
Okay.
And so I'm pretty happy about it.
Yeah. So I guess my question, my follow-up to that would be, going forward, do you see continuing to do work sort of thinking about it as an original graphic novel, or do you want to get back to serializing if the publisher's on the same page?
Loaded question. Loaded
It is a loaded question.
Yeah, because
You seem to ask
well, you
tough
want to
ones,
talk
so,
about
you
the
know.
audio movie?
Well,
I want to talk about that too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Brian asked a very specific question. ElfQuest from issue number 1 in 1978 up through Final Quest issue number 24 in 2018, 40 years to the day after that first appearance of ElfQuest, was, as I have described it before, this great, grand Joseph Campbell-esque hero's journey of an arc of a story. We realized that now ElfQuest still goes on because there are stories that happen in the future of ElfQuest, but we realized for this particular arc, it needed what in music would be a coda.
Coda, yeah.
You know, a little something at the end of it, because there were questions left unanswered at the end of Final Quest that really, really, really needed to be answered. And this goes back to the autobiographical nature of the whole story that Wendy was talking about. We have still some questions, and we're working those through Stargazer's Hunt. Once that's done, we expect to be very busy executive producing the audio movie. You asked about continuing comics. And here's where I'm going to shuck and jive a little bit, because among other things, Wendy has said, I do not ever want another deadline in my life again.
No.
That's fair. That's fair.
No.
And however, there are still wonderful stories to be told. We're going to take a little bit of time to figure out how best to do that. You asked serialized or all in a chunk. These are all great questions and fair questions, and they want answers. And probably I'm going to be spending some of that time sussing out what's best for ElfQuest.
Sure. I think, you know, as a publisher, since you are one of the few creative teams that actually understand the publishing side of things, you know, because you've done it. It strikes me that the amortization that you get by serializing a work allows the work to be cheaper in the long run. I mean, again, you've got 40 years of it, which you're giving away now because you can. And, you know, when I look at the market as a whole, you know, I often find that people who are doing original graphic novels, instead of it being a $15 book, let's say, it ends up being a $25 hardcover, because that's the only way you can make the creative costs back, you know, by charging that kind of a price, because you're going to sell fewer copies at the end of the day of a single book than you are of a serialization plus a book. I'm not saying do one thing or the other, but that's, you know, that in my head, that's the way that things are.
And as you point out, I understand all of that. There are a lot of moving pieces to this.
Yeah, of course.
We've gotten to a point where we take it one project at a time. We're wrapping up Stargazer's Hunt. It's going to be spectacular. It's going to be incredibly satisfying. And
that makes me happy, because that's Richard's story. Cutter was my character, and ElfQuest was all about taking him through his hero's journey, but Skywise is Richard's character. And, you know, he gets his own moment in the sun.
And as we have alluded, there are other projects that are not directly comics related that have sprung up that we're very excited about. One of them we've already said is the audio movie. There are others that we're not really at liberty to say anything about at this moment.
Yeah. So let's talk about the audio movie just for a minute.
Let's do that.
Very successful Kickstarter.
Yes.
Well beyond what you asked for.
Absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
This is so much fun, because way back when, in the early 1980s, ElfQuest, the first 5 issues were novelized. They were put into prose. Wendy wrote the novelization. And very quickly after that, Listening Library said, we want to do an audiobook. So they did. And it was a pretty simple reading of the prose. There were some sound effects. There was a tiny little bit of music. And I think they had a few different actors. And that came and went as licenses do. And I thought, my God, we're in the 21st century now. I really ought to do something with these audio files that I own. So I digitized all of them, and I said, well, right, I got a bunch of MP3s. What do I do with them? I was talking to Sandy Resnick, who was one of our contacts at DC Comics, great guy. And he said, I want to put you in touch with somebody I know. And this was Fred Greenhalgh of Dagaz Audio. And Fred called me up, and we spent 2 hours on the phone talking about what he saw that an ElfQuest dramatization, what he is calling an audio movie, could be. A full cast of known voices, a full orchestral score, bespoke sound effects, acting, doing something like the BBC did with Lord of the Rings or Star Wars or any of these like major projects, and they're doing it. You know, the Kickstarter and the early bird Kickstarter were very successful. They're knees deep into it now. It's just the most exciting thing that's happened to ElfQuest since we started publishing it.
Yeah,
yes. and it's going to be the most faithful adaptation. One of our struggles with the movie over the years is ElfQuest has been optioned many times, but we've always been deeply disappointed with the direction that the optioners have wanted to take it. They seem to come to you and say, oh, we love ElfQuest, we're big fans. Now we're going to change it all around.
Sure, because we got to fit the whole thing into 2 hours.
Yeah.
Right.
And we had always rather no movie than a bad movie. So the ElfQuest audio movie is the most faithful adaptation of ElfQuest you could ever imagine. And I know it for a fact because I work on the scripts. My job is kind of a script editor to make sure the voices are all correct. And they've done an incredibly beautiful job of adapting the story.
And are they approaching it as a new and original thing on its own, or I don't know if you've listened to the Sandman audio adaptations, which are literally they're the comics. I mean, it's not a movie, it's not a play, it's the comics. They've brought the comics to life somehow. It's the crazy thing.
No, to answer your question, I believe. This is not a simple reading of the comics by good voice actors with music and sound effects, because they have taken material from the comics, they've taken material from the novelization, and the novelization expanded upon a whole lot of stuff that just never fit into the comics. Yeah. And the writers, plus Wendy, are adding new and tweaked material even after there are new scenes that nobody's ever seen or heard. So it is both very faithful because and it is new.
Okay, very good. And let me ask you one sort of last question on this theme. And you said ask provocative questions. So I'm going to ask this is a provocative question, but I think it's important for creative people to think about. What happens to ElfQuest when you guys, God forbid, but eventually you're going to die, right? What happens to it? Who carries it on at that point? Have you thought about that? Have you put time and thought into that, or
more than that?
we have put a lot of thought into it. That's thank you for asking that, because A, you're the first person to ask it, and B, it has become a subject of great import to us because, nobody gets out alive. And we both
just turned 70. So, we're now thinking about the future.
I'm hoping you've got another 30, 40 years,
Well, so do we. Do we. But the point is, if you keep waiting, we know way too many people who, for whatever reason, and there is no judgment, but we know way too many people who have not planned for their futures. And so we have begun investigating what it means to have ElfQuest survive us. What's his name? Barry, who wrote Peter Pan. He just left the property to the hospital for children. I can't imagine us doing that, because I can imagine ElfQuest having enough of a life beyond what we're able to bring to it that I want it to give it that chance. There are a lot of different things to investigate. There are a lot of different people to talk to. There are a lot of different relationships to explore. Walt Disney, he already had a company, and he had a brother, and he had people who could carry on after he passed away. We don't have something like the Disney company. But we want to have something in place so that ElfQuest survives us. What form that takes, I don't know. It's like sussing a story. It's like writing a story. We're writing this story at the same time as we're writing ElfQuest.
Exactly. The original artwork is safe and sound at Columbia University. So we know that that's going to, as long as the university stands, the artwork is going to be there for people to study. And that's part of the legacy. We're very, very pleased about that.
Excellent.
So
okay, well, as I said, we're coming up on 2 hours now. Wow. I totally keep going, but let's wrap it up. The last question is always that we have a lot of people who watch the series of videos who want to be comics makers of their own. You certainly have a very unique perspective of time and how the industry has changed at least 5 times during your tenure in the business. It pretty much changes every decade, right? With that kind of scope of history, if someone comes to you and goes, I want to make comics, what's your pieces of advice for them? And it can be a physical thing, it can be a philosophical thing, it can be an emotional thing, but what's your advice for people who want to make comics?
I'll start, you finish. How's that? Okay. Make the comics. Believe in what you've got to say, and find a way to make the comics, whether you draw them on paper or do them digitally. Make the comics. Tell the story. Tell people what happened.
I can't emphasize that enough. Over the years, we've had many people say to us, I have a great idea. And we say, where is it? Well, it's in my head. Well, that's not useful. Get it on paper. Get it on, realize it.
Find a way to do it. I mean, if you have a day job, keep the day job. For God's sakes, keep your day job.
Right.
But find a way to do it. Find a way to devote yourself to it. Believe in it. Don't give up. Don't get distracted. Devote yourself to the story and putting your vision together. Believe in it.
There are any number of ways that you can show your story. I mean, digitally, you've got channels and vlogs and websites and whatever. You can get the story out there. If what you want to do is tell the story, you're going to be able to do it. If you're starting out by saying, I want to do comics and make $1 million, that ain't going to happen.
No.
That ain't going to happen. You can maybe work your way up. Maybe if you're 1 in a million, you hit lightning in a bottle again, the way we were very lucky to do almost 50 years ago. God, it hurts to say that.
Yeah.
But do the thing first. Make it real first.
Yeah. Don't talk about it, especially. This is the most important advice I can give you, is don't talk it to death. Don't talk about it with your friends. You know, pick maybe 1 or 2 people at most that you trust deeply to give you good practical feedback. And you can tell them your idea. Beyond that, absolutely do not ever go online on Facebook and put your idea out there and ask the hive mind what it thinks. Never do that, ever. You will kill your enthusiasm for your own project. People will suck you dry, and that is just not the way to get a creation done.
Yeah, that every word of that makes so much sense to me, and yeah, I agree so much. I really want to thank you guys for both the generosity of your time tonight, but I also want to thank you for this, and then all of the other volumes that are after this. This is great comics, and they're the kinds of comics that we want to support, and that it's art, and thank you for it. I cannot say that enough. Thank you for being yourselves. Thank you for making this.
Well, thank you for hosting us for a couple of hours. We love doing this.
This has been one of my favorite interviews of all. Loved your questions.
Thank you. I didn't even get to some of them. I had a whole thing I wanted to ask you about cosplay before it was cosplay.
Oh, for goodness sake. Let's do this again.
Part two.
Let's do it again.
Part two.
We'll do a part 2 then. Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay. Sounds
We're
good.
committing.
I really appreciate that. Okay, so the book is ElfQuest. This is volume 1, the original quest, as they say. If you are sitting at home, you don't know what to read, you don't know what to do, this is a fantastic book. As I mentioned before, it's 728 quality pages of comics, and it's $25 from Dark Horse. I mean, you'd be a fool not to buy this. So do this. Next month's Graphic Novel of the Month Club, we're going to be talking to Terry Moore about the awesome Strangers in Paradise. So look for that. And then on 2 Sundays from now, for our new Graphic Novel of the Month Club, we are talking to the fantastic Dave McKean about Raptor. And that is going to also be a really fascinating conversation, because Dave McKean is an artist, if you ask me. That's what I got for you. I hope that anybody who's tuning in for the first time here, and there's a large number of you I see scrolling through and I'm sorry we didn't get to your questions. It was rolling well. I didn't want to break in with your questions. But if I would hope that you would hit the bell in the corner and do the thing and subscribe to this, and and if you think about it, like, join the club, because not only do you get the book, but everybody who's a subscriber also gets this signed book plate from Richard and Wendy, and every book that we select comes with an original custom book plate. We do these interviews. You're supporting a quality comic book store, and it's awesome freaking staff who are just trying to bring you guys the best comic books. So I want to thank Wendy and Richard for doing this. I want to thank all of the members of the club. I want to thank Jordan for running the show. I want to thank Zoe and Kat, my fantastic staff. And again, thank everybody for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Thanks very much for watching this episode of the Classic Graphic Novel of the Month Club. If you enjoyed this interview, please make sure you hit subscribe and hit that bell up in the top corner. Every month we look at the history of comics and we pick a great graphic novel to bring you and a great interview to bring you as well. We'd love it if you joined the club, and we hope that you can join us.